and colleagues, both those in the room and those who are joining us online. Good afternoon and welcome to the Institute of European and American Studies. My name is Qianyu Lu. I'm a political scientist here at the Institute. It is my great honor to introduce Professor Alain Brossat as our very special and very distinguished speaker this afternoon. Dr. Brossat is Professor Emeritus at the Department of Philosophy at Paris 8 University in France. He was a Yushan scholar in Taiwan between 2018 and 2022. He specializes in contemporary European philosophers such as Foucault, Deleuze, Benjamin, Arendt, and Elias. His interests of subjects include human war and totalitarianism in the 21st century, historical denialism and collective memory, life power, life politics, and contemporary political governance, geo-philosophy and knowledge decolonization, migrant worker and the invisible population at the bottom of societies, political violence, Nazi and Siberian concentration camps, genocide, geopolitics, and origin and critique of hegemony. Professor Brossat is author of dozens of books. It's very generous of him to have brought a small selection of his books that's free for participants to keep the books that you're interested in. His most recent book, published this year in French, is titled Gaza, A People's Day. Is that?
A People's Day.
It draws from his 1990s.
This one. Sorry.
It draws from his 1996 book, The Disaster of the 20th Century, which dealt with the Nazi Holocaust. The new book, the most recent book, analyzes and criticizes the ongoing genocide of Palestinians by Israel. Dr. Brossat has studied Palestine for over 30 years. It is a very rare opportunity for us in Taiwan to have someone with the understanding of Israel and Palestine of such depth and width. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Alain Brossat.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I will speak in anger and grief. I know that it's not very academic, it's not the right academic tone, but I have to speak on this issue, on this subject in anger and grief. The only thing which is able to soften a bit the tone is that I don't speak in my language, which is French, so I have to read my paper in English, which is the global lingua franca, and I will say things differently from what I would say than if I would speak my own language in a more, let's say, vivid way. So, okay, I will read my paper, which I wrote maybe about a month ago, so a few things might have displaced themselves a little bit, notably concerning the new situation in Syria, but for the essential, I stick to what I wrote a month ago. So I have shown the book I published, which is actually a collection of articles I wrote since even before the beginning of the destruction of Gaza, as things were developing and becoming worse and worse in Gaza, and for the Palestinians in general. I would like to mention another book we published in France, my friends and me, with, it's a collective book actually, with French contributors, but not only. One of them is here, Anne, who is from Vietnam. She wrote a beautiful article. So this is it. Now, my paper is called Midnight in the Century. It is not only the total that is genocidal, destruction of Gaza by the Israeli state with all what follows, that is a disaster and a great moment of de-civilization, a plunge into barbarism. It is everything that surrounds it. The silence of the West, the abandonment of the Palestinians, that imparts its moral as well as political dimension to this disastrous event. The silence of the West during the entire sequence that has now lasted for more than a year. This is first and foremost for us, global democratic North, the heart of the disaster, its advanced point. The atrocities committed by the Israelis, I mean as a community, the population being largely in solidarity, passively or actively, with the state and the army in this context, this is not intended to surprise us from this rogue criminal state. We expect nothing but the worst. Everything that preceded these mass exactions has prepared us for it. We will not be surprised or deplore the fact that they believe that they can do anything they want. They have always done anything they want, both in terms of dispossession and disproportionate violence against the Palestinians and in their constantly violent and predatory relations with their neighbors. They have always allowed themselves everything because they are devoid of any kind of scruples, prey to her hubris that never wanes. But also, and before all, because they feel assured of impunity, protected by friends in the Schmittian sense of the term, who are themselves intouchable because they are hegemonic. The reason of state, that is raison d'etat in French, is for them rooted in the fanaticism not of conversation, not of survival, but of the perpetual extension of power in what one could call by antiphrasis the culture of impunity. In this sense, the Israeli state does indeed have, all things being equal and all differences in circumstances and place being taken into account, the Israeli state has solid affinities with the Nazi state. The reversal, or if you prefer, transfiguration of the motive of legitimate defense and vital threat into an unlimited and uninterrupted right of conquest lies at the foundation of this proximity. The worst is not what we could have anticipated in its general outlines, that is, the destruction of Gaza finds its premises in a policy of attrition, that is the blockade of Gaza, and the bloodbath, that is the bombing, formally defined as targeted, that has lasted for decades. The worst is, as always, what takes us by surprise because we could not have imagined it. That is, the silence and passivity of states and public opinion of the so-called international community in general and in Western countries in the first place. Faced with the way in which for months and months the Israelis have been sowing disaster, chaos and death, not only in Gaza, but now throughout the region, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq. Over the month, Israeli hubris has changed scale. It is now extending its ravages to the regional level. It is indeed a matter, as has been noted in the international press, of upsetting the configuration of relations between states' powers throughout the Middle East. We will not say to change the rules of game. So far are we here from anything that could resemble a game, but a rule pure and simple by operating a demonstration of force based on the method and using means of state terrorism, sometimes on a mass scale and sometimes in a targeted manner. All this is intended to create a global fait accompli, according to which Israel would henceforth be the master, the indisputable hegemon of the region, capable at any moment of dissuading any protagonist whatsoever, state or not, from contesting this hegemony. Here too, a comparison with the Nazi state is necessary. It is indeed a matter of establishing Israeli supremacy over the entire Middle East in the manner in which the Nazi state undertook and temporarily succeeded in making itself master of Europe. The heart of the disaster is the more than passive attitude of Israel's friends, of European governments, of Arab governments, and, with rare exceptions, of the international community in the face of this policy of terror, destruction, and conquest. The heart of the disaster is also that in none of these countries have sufficient counter forces emerged among the population capable of imposing a radical change of direction on their leaders. It would be wrong to speak here of helplessness, of powerlessness, because nothing prevents European leaders and other countries from recalling their ambassadors to Israel, except, of course, for petty domestic political calculations, or worse, rather, except for their deep affinities with Israeli leaders, whatever the crimes and abuses of which these are guilty. Nothing obliges them to pretend to believe that this death machine that the state of Israel has become is the inevitable reparation in action for the Holocaust. Nothing obliges them to provide without interruption and whatever happens military and other equipment, allowing Israel to conduct a totally asymmetric war against the Palestinians and its neighbors. The ground or the basis of silence here is not dismay or helplessness, it's complicity. Western leaders try to put on a show by pretending to want to moderate the infinite violence of the Israeli terror apparatus, sometimes going so far as to mine disapproval, even indignation, brandishing the threat of suspending arms sales, with the French and the Germans, not to mention the US of course, standing out in particular in terms of double talk. But in practice, they are consistently behind and with the Israeli war machine. The signs that do not lie here are numerous. When Iran pretends to retaliate very timidly, the Iranian leaders are terrified at the idea of a direct confrontation whose outcome, probably unfavorable for them, would throw them into the dustbins of history. So when Iran pretends timidly to retaliate, the leaders of the US, of Britain and France join as one man with the Israelis to stop the drones of the common enemy. When the activists of the Israeli colonization in the West Bank organize a big party in Paris to which they invite the notorious supremacist and fascist leader, member of the government of Netanyahu, Bezalel Smotrich, nothing is done officially to prohibit this fascist from entering French territory, and the police protects their infamous gathering. At the same time, that is during the same days, at the same time, and by contrast, a harsh contrast, all the means of the Parisian police are implemented to find the weak-minded person who, a few days earlier, exhibited in the metro a t-shirt emblazoned with anti-Jewish. We cannot, therefore, if we want to keep up with the disaster in progress, we cannot speak of even of a permanent Munich, a mega Munich, orchestrated by the chamberlains or the Daladiers of the Western chancelleries of today, in the face of the scorched earth policy and the spirit of conquest embodied by Netanyahu and his generals. We cannot speak of a perpetual capitulation fueled by some kind of bad realism or atavistic pusillanimity. It is not a question of retreat, it is not a matter of procrastination, of indecision that is at stake here, but rather of unalterable solidarity and support for a criminal state whose fundamental principle of action is based on an unconceivable theory of pure exception. Everything is permitted. It can allow itself all it likes, since it is what it is, that is the state of Israel. The untouchable protégé and spoiled child of the West, and this exorbitant right is its exclusive prerogative, which in practical terms of the deployment of state and armed power and violence can be translated into, as soon as it concerns Israel, everything is possible, including therefore genocide, which is supposed to embody in the eyes of the international community and international law since the Second World War, the absolute crime. This, everything is possible, stands out insofar as it is based on a theory of pure exception. Everything is possible for the Israelis in this respect precisely. What they can allow themselves in all areas and in all respects is what for others, for all others, constitutes or would constitute a pure and simple flagrant, blatant, and unbearable violation of the elementary principles of international law, of the law of nations, and more generally, of the foundations of civilized life. When the Russian army bombs a hospital, when Russian drones kill civilians, women and children on Ukrainian territory, this provides, in the eyes of the leaders and power elites of the Western world, proof of the intrinsic barbarity of the sponsors of these exactions, that is Putin and the totalitarian Hydra autocratic Russian state. The norms and values that are supposed to be inscribed in the foundation of the contemporary international order dictate the movements of disapproval that take shape each time an actor, state or not, engages in this kind of exaction, except Israel, the absolute and perpetual exception. Israel has every right, can do anything, reduce the Gaza Strip to ashes, destroy its hospitals, schools, archaeological sites and facilities, massacre the population, starve the survivors, practice ethnic cleansing on a large scale, bomb and ruin the villages of southern Lebanon and the working class neighborhoods of Beirut. Israel can kill and mutilate dozens of people by using booby-trapped electronic devices, remotely assassinate a leader of a Palestinian faction in the Iranian capital, liquidate one after the other the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah, periodically carry out airstrikes on targets located in Syria, defy the UN and international jurisdictions, etc., etc. For having committed a tenth of these crimes, including genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, terrorist actions, targeted assassinations, any other power, state or not, would be doomed to be placed outside human society, designated as an enemy of the human race, a criminal state, and a public danger that must be urgently put out of action, incapacitated, except Israel. Israel can do anything because whatever this death machine does, it is written off by the rulers, the elite of the West, and for a good part, Western opinion. It is a matter of, let's say, perpetual absent-mindedness. It doesn't print, let's say in French, it doesn't strike, it doesn't impress. And this in striking contrast to the way in which the violent actions of other powers, state powers, not to mention groups labeled as terrorists, there, on the contrary, nothing is allowed to pass. The newspapers immediately make headlines, opinions are heated to the white heat, the famous values of which the West is the self-appointed guardian are invoked in the most melodramatic tones. This regime of perpetual, unwavering immunity granted to a terrorist, criminal and rogue state, totally uninhibited and withdrawn in the feeling of its right in all circumstances, this regime of immunity is truly astounding. It's inconceivable. And this is undoubtedly the reason why, insofar as it pushes the limit of everything we can imagine, this situation plunges opinions and the public into such a state of shock and stupor. the truly overwhelming phenomenon is that this absolute exception tends to create habituation. We are becoming accustomed to the fact that the crimes and the violence perpetrated by the Israeli power and placed under the regime of the normalized exception, a unique regime, normalized as a pure exception. How can such a perpetual scandal be normalized? How can silence, abstention, avoidance, and evasion, instituted as a line of conduct, prosper indefinitely under this regime of events, of politics that must be called by its real name, that is terror, or, if you prefer, terrorism? What weight do the cumulative crimes committed by the main, let's say, franchises of international Islamist terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, etc., have? What weight do they have in comparison to those who, for over a year, have been massively perpetrated, this in the wake of an immemorial series of violence intended primarily to prevent the Palestinian people from existing among other peoples? Not to mention, of course, all the rest, that is the wars in Lebanon, the bombing and commando actions in Syria that are in full run right now, etc. Terrorism that finds its full measure is always state-based, and Israel is its prophet, its tireless seeker and scout. Israel is constantly innovating, not in counter-terrorism, but in state terrorism. And in this respect, not only for its own benefit, but for all its friends and allies. This by practicing on a scale hitherto unknown the doctrine of using disproportionate means, intended to produce a saturation effect on the ground, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, this by decapitating enemy groups with overwhelming selective precision, this by resorting to destructive technology of a sophistication hitherto unknown, the famous booby-trapped pages. Also, as well, by resorting to new methods of attrition, demoralization, and terrorization of the population, all this adorned with the most cynical humanitarian alibis, that is, like calls to evacuate this or that zone before bombing, and then targeting the displaced persons who have complied with these injunctions. The Israeli army never stops innovating in this way, in the field of a strategy that no longer makes any distinction between armed opposition and civilian population, and whose principle is openly exterminationist in order to annihilate the opponent, the adversary. Everything is permitted, and it is necessary to drain the swamp, that is, to directly attack the populations in which the enemy is immersed. The methods tested today by the Israelis in Gaza are in line with those of the US military in Vietnam, the French in Algeria, those of counter-insurgency, in a context where the link between armed movements and the population is intimate. But they do not just follow, the Israelis here do not just follow this lineage. They renew and radicalize them. Both the French and the Americans relied, with varying results, on local auxiliaries, in particular with the idea of mobilizing part of the local population through them to their side against the insurgents. The Israelis, for their part, make do with paid informants, considering the Palestinians uniformly as a whole as the enemy, which is consistent with the denial that they constantly practice of their existence as a people. And this is why they do not say the Palestinians as a rule, they say the Arabs, just the Arabs. In their practices of attrition, destruction, and extermination, they no longer differentiate between the fighters and the population. The massacre of several dozen civilians as the price for eliminating a Hamas or Hezbollah leader has become a standard, a norm in their counter-insurgency strategy. And the worst thing is that international opinion, particularly Western opinion, is getting used to it. And at the rate things are going, it will soon no longer find anything to complain about. From this point of view, too, the affinities of this state power with the Nazis are striking. The enemy are not only those who actively resist, the enemy is, on the scale of any population, a collective living body, insofar as it just resists by surviving. What the Israeli leaders and military are practicing is no longer so much a war as what Michel Foucault would call a continuous thanatopolitics, with its moments of intensification and paroxysm, as has been the case since October 7th. What is being reduced to a purely residual condition is a population as a whole, assigned to its ethnic, cultural, historical origin, the Palestinians, ensuring that their destiny is that which fell to the first peoples of North America, the Indians on their reserves. The Israelis are increasingly waging a race war, openly. And like all race wars, this one is marked by the phantasmagoria, that is, the Palestinians, of course, are not a race, they are a people, and the Israelis themselves are anything you want but a race. Faced with this situation, in this configuration, pure and simple indignation is a trap, it's a dead end. It is not a question of being indignant that the guardians of values, the Democrats, the progressives, the humanists, the friends of the people and of the peoples, are watching this barbaric frenzy without reacting, as passive spectators. This is an approach to the problem that is not only superficial, epidermal, but biased, falls in its premises. It cannot be overemphasized that Western democracies, starting with their leaders and elites, but also including what we persist, no doubt wrongly, in calling the public opinions, that is, publics entirely anesthetized by the general system of communication that has become in the West increasingly indistinct from propaganda. The Western leaders, rulers, and elites are not here passive spectators of a large-scale drama. They are, one and all, stakeholders, more or less active and consciously engaged in a policy conducted by a criminal state that involves them all, directly or indirectly. This begins, of course, with all those who, in France in particular, but in Germany as well, and in all Western countries, believe that the rise of anti-Semitism is truly the main concern of the moment. Those who lend a hand to this perpetual diversion are included in the field of this criminal policy and of this disaster. Consequently, the indignation whose natural outlet is the perpetual adjuration of the rulers to do more in order to moderate the destructive and conquering passions of the Israeli death apparatus. Indignation constantly misleads the guardians of values. The primary problem is not to convince the power elites of all kinds to mobilize more with a view to saving ceasefires. It is actually to take the measure of what is meant by the this general configuration in which, in truth, these elites are obstinately, as much as hypocritically, but actively, always actively, in one way or another, behind the Israelis, with the Israelis, at their sides. It is this disaster that it is important to take the full measure of. Because what is clearly drawn here are the contours of a disaster that is not only local, Israel-Palestine, but global, and in which the West, that is essentially white, democratic, and global North, is both the promoter and the center of gravity. The heart of the disaster is this pure insanity. These are the guardians of global democracy, those who have made this master signifier, democracy, the pivot of the fight against their adversaries and competitors, designated more and more openly as absolute systemic enemies, Russia, China, Iran, etc. Those who are in a perpetual crusade against terrorism on a national and international scale, against rock states and the totalitarian era. Those who proclaim themselves vicars, guardians, janitors of the international order based on law, or, as they now say more cautiously, rules. Those who never stop promoting civilized norms and values as the legitimate foundation of their hegemony on a large scale. These are the ones who since October 7 have been the most constant, stubborn, invariant supporters of mass state terrorism, of the exterminations practiced by the Israeli power. The current disaster is this kind of arrangement of the name of democracy, and democracy as a more or less informal bloc power, still supported by very solid institutions like NATO. This arrangement of democracy on the scorched earth policy pursued with consistency by the Israeli state. A policy of chaos conducted by fascists, supremacists, driven by an unlimited appetite for destruction and conquest. By people whose war is the element of predilection. They are constantly at war. Whose force is the only criterion, for whom destruction has become the natural element. The heart of the contemporary disaster is this. It is the power, the rulers, the global influences, white, Democrats, global North, who have made the defense and promotion of human rights, of law in general, values, their banner, who are the most stubborn supporters of this new black plague, which is given free rein in all directions in the Middle East under the colors of Israel. A state without a constitution, but whose legitimacy is based on the memory of the genocide perpetrated by the Nazis. A state that sees itself as a compensation, a redress for the harm done to the Jews, that endlessly takes advantage of its privilege at the hair of the victims. It is these crusaders of global democracy who, in the name of the allegedly most virtuous cause, that is the fight against anti-Semitism, have persevered in their unwavering support for the Israeli war death machine. And here, I think that we need to change somehow our approach to the crucial issue of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We need, in the face of Gaza and everything surrounding its destruction since October 7th, we need to change the terms of the conversation on state criminality in its most extreme state of concentration, with everything that goes with it, that is, for Western ethics or moral philosophy, radical evil, the imprescriptible, the extreme, the unforgivable, all these motifs that have saturated the intellectual debate in the West in the last decades of the last century, with reference to the Holocaust, and this in particular under the effect of Claude Lanzmann's famous film Shoah. According to the legitimized approach to genocide, the framework of which was set by the promoter of the term, Raphael Lemkin, who was a jurist, it is defined, that genocide defined according to its own characteristics, which call for a specific legal qualification. Crime against humanity, the crime of genocide are imprescriptible to the extent that the object of genocide presents distinctly identifiable features. And among these, very important, the intention of the criminal power occupies a primordial place, as well as the means implemented related to it. Intention to make a human group disappear, designated according to its ethnic, racial, religious, social characteristics, as well, and implementation of the extermination process intended to achieve this end. The means used, the procedures and techniques for implementing the elimination of the supposedly homogeneous population can vary considerably, but it is always a matter of removing, that is, annihilating a segment of humanity considered inferior, dehumanized, decried as harmful and dangerous parasites. The approach to genocide that has imposed its authority in the tradition established by Lemkin is based on these premises. The strictly genocidal intention of the perpetrator, the systematicity of the extermination project, and that of the means implemented, industrial or not. It is indeed a matter of eliminating the targeted group to the end, that is, to the last one, as is commonly said. The genocidal undertaking, based on the combination of systematic destruction of the living environment, the massacres, particularly by air, and ethnic cleansing, as the Israeli state is conducting it in Gaza, leads us to a change in this approach. On the one hand, the destruction of the targeted population, the Palestinians, takes the form of an increasingly massive and brutal attrition, intended to gradually reduce this population to a purely residual condition. So this by contrast, of course, with the gas chambers of the Germans. In this sense, it differs in its implementation from the exterminations carried out by the Nazi or the Rwandan genocide. It is part of another form of rationalization of the elimination of the population concerned, even if, for the most part, that is the strategic aim, let's say general historical horizon of the operation remains absolutely the same. That is to reduce to nothing the chances, the possibility for a people or a population to live among other peoples, that is to occupy its own place, having its own space on this planet. On the other hand, and this is for me the crucial point, the specific feature of the genocidal enterprise conducted by Israel in Gaza is obvious. It can be detected with the naked eye, so massive it is, provided that one does not shirk its examination. What makes this work of death possible, that is what creates its very condition of possibility, is not the perpetrator's own power, that is the abysmal or intrinsic disproportion of forces between the criminal and his victim, as is the case both during the implementation of the Shoah by the Nazis, who at the time dominated all of Europe, or when the genocide of the Tutsi was carried out in Rwanda. What is in the first place the condition of genocide here? In this case, it is made of an external factor. That is the support given to the state of Israel, support of all kinds, but to our violence in the first place by a vast coalition of external forces, at the center of which are the Western democracies. Everyone knows that Israel is entirely dependent, both militarily, technologically, politically, on this support. Deprived of the latest military equipment provided by the Western democracies, with the US in the forefront, of course, Israel would be quite incapable of successfully carrying out the all-out destruction operations that it is conducting on all fronts in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran, not to mention, of course, the unwavering moral, that is propagandistic, support provided by this coalition to these operations. For a long time now, the Israeli army has only been conducting totally asymmetrical warfare operations, like the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, that is desk and highly technological warfare operations that primarily target civilian populations with losses that are increasingly disproportionate between an army that has all of the technological means to strike the enemy from a distance without exposing itself, and opponents equipped at best with light weapons or makeshift equipment. The myth of the IDF, an army of the people valiantly resisting the assault of its allied neighbors, determined to throw the Jews into the sea, this has long been shattered. No more in Gaza than in the West Bank, it is a war in the classical sense of the term that the Israeli army is conducting against the Palestinians, armed or not. This totally asymmetrical war is made of operations combing pacification, colonial counter-insurgency, that is basically terror, more and more distinctly inscribed in an exterminationist horizon. What must be measured in its full scope is therefore this: the Israeli power of death only exists insofar as it is carried on its shoulders by its supporters, notably Western ones. In this sense, the genocide underway in Gaza is some sort of a joint venture. The powers that provide the means and provide the political cover fully share the responsibility for it. This figure is new. It's a historical formation. The perpetrators of genocide usually act or acted alone on their own behalf, which has or had the effect that they alone had to bear in the face of history, in the face of the world, the responsibility for their crimes. That is, the Nazi leaders, the Rwandan genocidaires, the Khmer Rouge, of course, without forgetting the instigators and executors of the Armenian genocide. One step further, one could or might go so far as to say that Israeli leaders are today in a mission, on assignment, when they implement, as they are currently doing, the solution they intend to bring to the supposed Palestinian question, that which consists in definitively rendering null and void any chance for the Palestinians to exist as a people among peoples. They act here less as, let's say, proxies than as delegates, or maybe vanguard. It is up to them to do the dirty work, but in doing so, they have every reason to feel assured of their rears. With the return of Trump to power and the rise to power in the global north of neo-fascists of all kinds, who are increasingly and openly fans of Netanyahu and Israeli supremacy, these arrangements will become ever clearer and clearer. Israel is not only an ally of these Western powers, it is a pioneer in the face of supposedly hostile worlds. The reasons why Taiwan's power elites have such unconditional admiration for Israeli leaders and see the state of Israel as an unsurpassable model is that these Taiwanese elite powers, they dream of playing vis-à-vis China the same role as the Western outpost that Israel occupies vis-à-vis the Arab Muslim world. This obscure disaster is, in this sense, much worse than that of the 30s and 40s of last century. For in the former configuration, at least, Nazism and its allies, fascism in general, were distinctly and massively identified by the opinions of Western democracies as evil. Nazism and the various fascisms made no secrets of their hostility to democracy, and they promoted openly their own vitalist, racist, conquering ideology, their own obscurantist mythologies, their regressive phantasmagorias. And this precisely allowed Democrats, humanists, progressive, rationalists, those who saw themselves as the continuers and promoters of the spirit of enlightenment, to form a front against the fascists, the Nazis. This made it possible for the lines of confrontation between proliferating, conquering fascism and what opposed it to be clearly drawn, which created the conditions for the visibility of the antagonism, its lines of force, and the stakes of the confrontation. The worst thing in the current configuration is the interweaving of this new fascism, of the uninhibited Israeli supremacism, as it is now setting an example for the West and beyond, of this new spirit of conquests, of this intrinsic nihilism, appetite for destruction of chaos, with what is supposed to oppose it, to resist it, that is democracy. It is the way in which this headlong rush, flight of the deadly power takes with it the name of democracy and the most undisputable, consensual good causes, the fight against racial prejudice and the injunctions of collective memory, that is to prevent the return, to prevent the repetition of the obscure disaster that is the Holocaust. The problem is that these injunctions do not only come along the repetition of the disaster, but of its expansion, of its completion. The fight against anti-Semitism has become in the West today the auxiliary, that is the perfect cover of this new fascism. And the circle is closed. The circle is closed when the defense and the promotion of values, when the very name of civilization, which is now inseparable from democracy, becomes the best helpers, adjuvants of nihilism on a grand scale, of a new barbarism that is embodied by Netanyahu and his gang. Beyond any figure of dialectics or possibility, or even quite simply of any possible representation of a confrontation between good and evil, those, that is a very tiny minority in the West, who do not give up, who call a spade, and Netanyahu a fascist, and Israel a criminal state, are at every moment exposed to the risk of being criminalized and assimilated to terrorism. When it gets to the point where those who say the name of the thing, what I'm talking about here, about the destruction of Gaza, genocide, are labeled as anti-Semitic, then yes, I think we can say that it is indeed midnight in the century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Brossat, for this very enlightening and depressing lecture. I think before we open the floor for questions, I have a lot of questions. I want to use my power as a host to first ask, I think, a very obvious question. Usually when I'm in a room with a group of people, I'm usually the one who worries the most and who is the most depressed and who is most pessimistic about the world. But today, having you sitting next to me, I think I'm not the most depressed person. But that's not very reassuring because the obvious question that I want to ask is there any hope? Because I guess I know your answer from the lecture itself. I don't see any hope. But if the answer is that there's no hope, how is it going to unfold moving forward? Especially between the short period of time when I received your draft of today's talk. I read it, and then Syria happened. The fall of Assad happened after I read this, and so things after that were happening very fast, and they all confirm your observation. So, what's going to happen in the future? You see Syria, and then I think yesterday in Russia there was an assassination of a general, and from what I've heard, there's also the fingerprints, of course, of the West democracies behind this kind of operations, covert operations or assassinations. So it all looks very, very scary. So in your opinion, what's the future looks? What the future looks like? That's the first question about future, whether or not there is hope. I also have a question about the past. You talk mostly about events and phenomena since October 7th of the last year. But what brought humanity here in a longer time horizon? What is it? Should we? Did it start after the First World War, or even long before that? The exception of Israel and this joint. You talk about joint venture. The West and Israel turning the world upside down right now. Was it ever inevitable? Was there at certain points there were things that we could do to make it develop in a way that's different from what we see today? Because for me, many people say right now we are at a moment what they call it's a mask off moment. So right now we're seeing many Western leaders who are in power, who are showing their true face today, and even towards their own people, the extent of corruption, the extent of power abuse. It's just very scary. So for someone like me, I had no idea the world is like this. But between the time that I noticed something was wrong to the point where we are right now, in this short space, there's nothing I could do. So I mean, was it destined? Was it our destination that we were heading this way? Was there ever any moments in history we could have done anything differently? Well, for me, I didn't even know the world was like this. So these two questions first. One concerning future, and one concerning past.
Now, should I answer now? Yeah.
Should we, or it's up to you? Do you want me to collect more?
Oh, I can. But these are two complicated questions. First thing I would like to say is that I cannot speak freely. I cannot speak completely freely. I will tell you why. Okay, in my talk I speak rather freely, but not totally. Because since this talk and our discussion will be available, I don't know anybody here, and anybody then will be able to listen to what I said here. If it would come to the ears of the police justice in my country that I said this, Hamas is not a terrorist group. I didn't say it. I say, if I would say Hamas is not a terrorist group, they are freedom fighters or whatever, Then there is a law which is called a law against the, I don't know if it works in English, apology of terrorism, that is supporting terrorism, which is very wide in its extension. I mean, it can mean many things. And among other things, that if I say Hamas is not a terrorist group, I can be summoned and have problems. Maybe not a trial, but problem, maybe for a fine, something like that. So I cannot speak freely. I mentioned that because it shows you the extension of the hysteria which has been reached in public opinion and in repression of free opinions on these issues in our countries. And same in Germany, in the US it's different because they have different rules. But in Western Europe, not in Spain, but in France, Germany, Belgium, etc., Netherlands, that would be. So I cannot say anything because you never know. You don't know. Maybe somebody here who doesn't like what I say, and we could report, and then when I go back home, have problems. And I don't want to have problems. So now to come to your question. So yes, and then I would say, but it's another matter. Basically, what happened? People can ask, but yes, all this begins with what happened on the 7th of October. I would say, in anthropological terms, it has to be called by its true name. It's a razzia. It exists. I know that the word exists in English, razzia. That is, it's something very simple. A group of people, a tribe or whatsoever, it's immemorial. I mean, the razzia, it's immemorial. A group of people, armed people, come, and there can be a lot of reasons for that, come and loot and destroy and burn and kill the people in a village, another place, another tribe, etc., etc. It is exactly that, what happened. It's a razzia. And it exists forever. And it's not very difficult to explain why it happens in this context, where, because of the blockade of Gaza, Gaza was before the event an open air concentration camp, and this for years and years where people stuff like that. And okay, so it's an explosion. It's a razzia. It happens like that. So, and what I also have to mention here is that that kind of razzia was something very common during all the phases of European colonization. They did it all the time. I mean, the French in Algeria, in sub-Saharan Africa, when they conquered the country in order to terrorize the people, because razzia has a terrorizing effect on local populations. Can't destroy everything, burn, loot, kill, rape women, etc., kill children, etc., etc. So this is what the colonial armies did, I mean, in the most common way when conquering new territories. So it's very surprising that we Westerners say, oh, such an horrible thing. You forgot? Have you already forgotten? It's not that far away in history what we did. So it was something quite usual. So, okay, it's a razzia. And I don't talk about terrorist action or not. I don't deny that it's a terrorist operation. But now to answer your question, any hope what the future looks like? It's a complicated issue. I have friends in France who say, look, okay, it's a complete disaster. But if you think about it in terms of history, general history, the lesson of what happened after the Second World War is that colonization, in general, it has to finish. It finished. I mean, all the colonized countries became independent. So there is a process in history that makes that, okay, in the most dramatic, complicated ways, but still, at the end, colonized countries become independent and sovereign. So why not the Palestinians? Why should this be the absolute exception? So they say, okay, we have all the reasons for being pessimistic today in the present situation, but on the long term, since it's the general course of history, the Palestinian way. Okay, it's a way of reasoning about it, but I'm not so sure. Because this is a settlers. This is a settlers colony, a settlers colonization, and in that case, things are much more complicated. We saw it in Algeria, because Algeria was a settlers colonization too, and this is what made things particularly dramatic when all the European settlers had to leave the country in the most dramatic conditions. So, yes, I think we have to imagine that this exception might continue against the course of history. That would be Israel as nothing but an ethnic apartheid state would remain as it is. And then, yes, the Palestinians would become, let's say, Indians, like Indians, you know what I mean, in the Wild West, on reserves. And we cannot say that this is impossible because it's against the course of history. It can happen, it might happen. So it's open. This is the only thing we can say. And now, hope, broadly speaking, there might some changes might happen related to international relations. Only this. But listen, when newspapers in the West talk about the Israel-Palestine issue, they always talk in terms of, okay, what can we do, that is, with the West, in order to solve the problem? So what is taken for granted is that the Palestinians are minus in terms of opposed to major, that is children. They are not the master. They cannot be in any way the masters of their own fate. Somebody from the outside who is a power, people who are serious, have to solve the problem. And this was Oslo. But Oslo was a total failure, an absolute and total failure, as Edward Said, among others, showed. So, this is very paradoxical. It's taken for granted that the solution has to come from the outside. But any trial to solve the problem from the outside was a complete failure and based on a total denial of the rights of the Palestinians. The last example, which is a caricature of what happened under Trump, the first Trump, Abraham agreements, which was a farce, which was something unbelievable. Okay, so I think that what we should say, the first thing we should say is, okay, first of all, is the problem of the people there. That is, among other things, the Palestinians. Their right to decide upon their own fate in historical terms. Okay, but we know that in the present conditions, the present situation, it's the most it's an inconceivable solution. So if we think in, let's say, realistic terms, one thing we could mention is that things are, in terms of balance of forces in the Middle East, things are flexible, things might change. And we had some opportunities, and we could notice that, okay, if a country like Turkey begins to move a bit, has some reason to confront Israel, then things begin to change, because the Israelis are not so, as, how to say, invincible as they look. So things might move from this angle with I don't know, Russia's very good relations with Israel presently, but it might change because everything is unstable in the Middle East. And who knows, maybe once China will say, we have our saying, we have something to say about it. And okay, there was one thing which was quite interesting, that the action of South Africa with international criminal court. Yes. So it was not, but they cannot do much, okay, because what they are and far away and being not playing not in the first league in international relations, but still it shows that things can move, things can be flexible, and who knows what can happen with Trump now. So yeah, it can move for the worse, and this is, I think, for the coming years, the most probable, but you never can rule out that it would move for, I will not say the best, but things which make an opening and change the game, the rule of the game, let's say. Or who knows? This is what I think. Yeah, and how did it begin? It's very simple. It began because Israel as an ethnic, which state, which is crazy because the Jews are not a nation. The Jews are even people, yes or no, but the people made of a multiplicity of so many things. So, and to make a nation state out of that, and of people coming from all around the world, the diaspora, and survivors of the Holocaust, it's a misconception. So there was something deeply wrong from the very beginning in this notion. I mean, okay, after the Second World War, Jews emigrating to these places for having good reasons for it. Okay, but the outcome being this ethnic state, this is not the worst of things. I mean, and you know, if you look at the history of the 20th century, states which were based on, let's say, false premises, it did exist. The East Germany disappeared, and East Germany was, to some extent, much more solid, legitimate than Israel as an apartheid state. After all, it was acknowledged, recognized as a sovereign state. It worked, more or less it worked. But something happened that made that disappear, and nobody's complaining about it. So, yeah. You know, I will tell you a story. When I was a kid, not exactly a kid, young man, let's say 17, I think. I was 17. I was in secondary school. And I went during summer to Israel with a group of friends, schoolboys like me. We went to a kibbutz. You know what a kibbutz is. We went to a kibbutz to work hard as volunteers with some sort of silly ideal of, you know, that kind of romanticism, the kibbutz helping these good people who were survivors of the Holocaust. And so. This kibbutz was at the border of Lebanon, which at that time was quite. There was one soldier watching guard during the night, and nothing happened. And we worked very hard for 2 months, picking up apples and I don't know, peaches. Yeah. Okay, it was very pleasant. And one day we went just walking in the countryside, and we just came across, we bumped into ruins. Okay, nobody was there. We went back to the kibbutz and asked the kibbutznik, the people who welcomed us, what are these ruins? And these people, most of them were survivors of the Holocaust. Many of them had the number on the arm, okay, tattooed. So many of them from French origin. So they had been sent to concentration camps during the war by the Germans. So impressive, very impressive for us. And they told us, oh, these are very old ruins from the Roman time. The Romans were in Palestine, everybody knows. Okay, we swallowed this. Many years after that, I was, I make it short, asked to translate an article written by an American scholar for a book, a collective book, or maybe a journal on Israel-Palestine. And this scholar had written this article on the creation of Israel, what we call today the Nakba, that is destruction of Palestinian life, while Israel was created the war at that time. And among many other destructions, he mentioned that the kibbutz where I was called in Hebrew Bar-Am. And there was a village, an Arab village, which during the Nakba was located there, which was called Bir-Am in Arab, Bir-Am. And of course, this was what I saw, the ruins. Bir-Am, which had become the kibbutz Bar-Am, just. And this was for me the end of any kind of empathy for the state of Israel and for Israel as a whole, because at that moment I understood that all this story was based on a lie, historical lie. So these people, they could not, these good people, survivors of the Holocaust, who had built this kibbutz, which was a socialist kibbutz, very egalitarian, living very simply. After that, the kibbutz became something very different. So, something which I took into consideration with admiration at the time I was there. Then I discovered that by translating this article into French, some sense of humiliation. That is, these people who told me that fake story about Roman ruins, etc., they really took me as a moron, and I do not like that. I really do not like that. So, okay, they will have the feedback, and the feedback is what I'm doing here. You see?
So, are you sure the things that you just said are okay when you go back? Okay, I think I'll collect questions from those in this room. Are there any questions? I'll also check. People online, feel free to ask questions in French, English, Chinese, and meanwhile, people online, you can raise your hand using the hand sign or using the chat room. Please.
Hello. Where can I push? Can I speak?
You push. There's
this button. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you for your talk. And I have a comment and a follow-up question, which I wrote here just now. So you know that I really been reading about ideology. And this, I want to make a connection with your talk. And excuse me, I cannot remember who said this, but someone who wrote about ideology said that instances of spontaneous instances of revolt or resistance.
I have to sit close to you.
Yeah, and also please speak up.
Hmm?
It's kind of quiet. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I will. Okay. So, I was reading someone who writes about ideology, and this person says, which I don't remember the name, who I don't remember the name, but they said that sometimes the way that ideology works is that sometimes when spontaneous instances of revolt or resistance against dominant ideology are usually relegated to the category of crime. And this relates to what you just said earlier about people in the West who dare to say something that are sympathetic of Palestinian people or even Hamas would be labeled terrorist sympathizers or terrorist apologists, right? And so I think this, in my view, speaks to the massive power of Western propaganda. And it doesn't just work in the West, but also, say, Taiwan, for example, or in other parts of the world. It's very, very powerful. And so the West kind of already hijacked the morals, like good morals, like we are the champions of democracy and human rights. And so they hijacked all these human values and they become the champions. And whoever do not conform to their own definitions of such values, they call the others terrorists or barbarians or whatever. And so my question is that how do we build or strengthen counter-ideology in the face of the fact that the West already hijacked dominant ideology and good ideology because they take moral values as their own, right? So how do we do this? Or do we have to become villains and become sort of like Machiavelli's prince? Thank you.
It depends on where we stand or where we sit. We already had some sort of an argument and exchange on that. I told you I cannot refrain from speaking as a Westerner. I am a Westerner, so I cannot be under disguise as something else. I am a Westerner. So I speak from the inside of the belly, of the stomach, of the whale. I'm Jonas. I'm Jonas. I sit there and I speak from the inside of the beast. I cannot do different things differently. And as such, I talk about double standards, of course. Morals, universal, but I work critically on double standards, on the false universal, things like that. Philosophy being my bracket, from the philosophical angle and by reference to all kinds of authors I can use, I try to deconstruct all this propaganda about Western universalism, which background is promotion, basically the promotion of hegemony, and the moral promotion of hegemony. So this is the only thing I can do, and by doing that, I can set up, let's say, I can work with people who have different perspectives and who stand or sit in other positions, who are different in their critical position, assessments on these Western pretensions. So yeah. Deconstruction, radical enlightenment against mainstream, things like that. I don't know what you expect. Don't expect too much. I mean, don't expect too much from us. We are tired, we are exhausted. I mean, you cannot imagine the pressure on these issues, the pressure when you live in France, and every day you have to do, not only to fight back, but to ask yourself, can I write this? Can I write this? And you ask your friends, can you check this? Can I really publish this? You know, I had very unpleasant weeks when I was in talk with an old friend who is a lawyer, asking him, you saw this book? I sent him my book, and I asked him, what do you think? What are the risks to the book? And he told me, yes, you cannot rule out that something will happen. And for a few weeks, I was feeling rather nervous because I knew what it meant, being summoned to police judiciaire, which shit the people. Well, their job is to investigate about crimes, killing, things like that, and they have to care about me for having written that. No, you see. So, yeah, this is the atmosphere. So, okay, you have to brace. You have to brace, but it's exhausting. I mean, it's much easier here because people talking about anti-Semitism. What is that? What is a Jew? I was so what is that? What anti-Semitism? And the unbelievable thing for here is that from the moment it began, I mean, the destruction of Gaza, the people in charge, the rulers, didn't open their mouth, said a word about what Israel is doing. Not a word, which is fantastic, extraordinary. Not a word. And they are promoting themselves as the Democrats in East Asia. They don't have to say a word on what is happening there. But in a sense, in spite of that, it makes it's still easier to talk about these things here freely because there's not all this ideological tension about it. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, so I can speak freely. But it's a shame. It's a shame.
There's a question online. Zoe, she's asking if we run into someone who's pro-Israel, if you can give us like 3 sentences to really bring home and emphasize what is happening, backed up by evidence to a pro-Israel support. Some sentences we can use when we run into someone who's pro-Israel, and we can say something to kind of persuade them. Your go-to arguments.
Oh, you can say maybe I'm a paranoiac. Maybe in my deepest unconscious, I have something against Jews. In my case, it would be very funny, but okay. No. But the fact is that recently Amnesty International said what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. Amnesty International, not me, the paranoid, crazy French. Amnesty International said that. Is Amnesty International peopled by frenzy, the rabid anti-Semite? So tell me, are you living in reality or not? If you're living in the real, if you're living in the reality, this is the kind of thing you have to take into consideration, not that frenzy French boy international, Amnesty International. This would be things like that. That is things which take us back to reality, not just arguing, being excited or this or that. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yes, I think that this would be a good perspective, relying on discourses, views which are authoritative, that is based on authorities we can trust. Obviously, we cannot we cannot rely on Western powers, because it's so obvious that they are partial, that they are totally committed to the cause of Israel, that no, they are the authority of the state. In that case, it doesn't work. So you have to rely on independent authorities, which are authorities like the UN, maybe UN, the International Court, like the Hague, Amnesty, and other association, institution of that kind, humanitarian, yeah.
She has a follow-up question. How about Christians who use the miracle narrative?
The hell with them. Yes, this because what is in the background here, all these U.S. evangelists, these are the ones. They are the ones. But basically, the funny thing is that basically these people hate Jews. I mean, in theological terms, they hate Jews. And through a very strange circuit, they become the best support of Israel. But they are anti-Semitic. They are the real anti-Semitic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your speech. I am a PhD student from Chongqing University in Taichung. I also study at Paris, and when I saw this conference, I was really excited to come. And my question is very simple. I remember on September.
Can you turn it on? You didn't turn it on. It's no, here.
Okay.
On the mic.
Okay, thank you. I remember on September 2024 at the 78th session of the United General Assembly, the Israel's Prime Minister stated that Israel seeks peace. He says that Israel is looking for peace, and I think he also mentioned that Israel has made peace already and will make peace again. So, in your opinion, what is the definition of peace for the Israeli people? When they talk about peace, what does that mean for them?
Hitler was not talking a lot about peace. Hitler was, when he was conquering Europe, all Europe, he was constantly talking about peace. Conquerors are talking massively about peace. Peace means, in this context, peace means pacification. Pacification in the sense of pacification in Vietnam during the American war in Vietnam. They were pacified in Vietnam, right? And peace means conquest. In that case, peace means conquest. If you look at what they are doing in Syria today, it's very obvious, it's crystal clear. Peace under our own conditions. That is, we will be the masters. We have to be the masters, and there will be peace. This is a typical fascist acceptation of peace, notion of peace. This is what he needs. He's a new Genghis Khan. So yes, they want peace in the Middle East, but peace as they mean it, according to their own interests. They would be the masters of the game from the Mediterranean Sea to the borders of Iran. That would be peace. And they could have an agreement with petro-monarchies, no problem. This can work easily. This can be set up easily. But they would be the masters all the region. Of course, having the US and the British behind them. It's very important for the Middle East. They need to have the US and the British behind them. The French are not reliable, as everybody knows.
我能问个问题吗？这样，我可以用中文问，可以吗？
按下这个。
哦，哪里？
The dog color.
这两个问题，我两个我猜测啊，这位老先生他的观点呢，他是对这个哈马斯这个组织，他是不同意用这个恐怖组织这个词来给这个哈马斯下定义的。那么，如果有一个词能准确的表达出他对哈马斯这个组织的一个定义，我想知道他更希望用一个什么词来描述哈马斯。这是第一个问题。第二个问题呢，就是说大多数这上面也有说，大多数的西方国家是keep silence， 就是说针对以色列的这个军事行动。那么大多数的民主国家呢，它是代表着人类文明进程的。那么就是说，大多数的国家保持沉默，这是否说明大多数的那个国家，他们所采取的这种措施，对以色列的这种绥靖纵容，或者说不管不问，是与人类文明的发展的这个进程背道而驰呢？或者我们个人看，我们不同意西方国家这么做，但是呢，大多数西方国家的确是在这么做。但是我们的观点是错误的，还是说他们的本身的他们这种 keeping silence is kind of wrong？ 我就想知道这个。
第一个问题好像那个他刚刚有讲说那个我不想让他回去被抓起来。就第一个问题，他刚刚好像是讲说okay, I'll just translate it to him. The first question could be dangerous for you because he asked if you disagree with the characterization of Hamas as terrorist group, how would you characterize Hamas? But if you feel like it'll get you into trouble, you don't have to answer this first question. And the second question is the fact that the West has kept silence about the whole situation. But at the same time, the West, in general, are democracies. And democracy is the path we're on, humanity's path to move forward. So does this fact mean that the West is going against the general direction of humanity, or is our conception that West is democratic and there are the more progressive ones on this path of humanity? Is this perception, this concept, is it wrong? I hope I've translated. Okay, do you think was it? 你第二个问题是说，就是西方是民主的，但是它是沉默的这一次，所以是不是它是跟人类进程背道而驰呢？
那它跟人类文明的这个进程啊，它是背道而驰的。那如果让它以我们这个教授的观点来看的话，那这样的话就出现一个问题。那么西方国家现在采取的这种沉默是对的呢，还是我们个人的这种观点是对的？它一定有一个对的错的。
So if that's so the question, the second question at the end he asked, is the West wrong or our conception is wrong? I think that's obvious. The answer is obvious.
So concerning Hamas and still having decided the intention not to go to jail in my country when I go back, I will answer this. First, when the last elections took place in Gaza, it was many years ago already because of the conditions which are not very easy, propitious for elections. Hamas won a huge, massive victory against the Palestinian Authority, which was totally discredited and unpopular as possible among the local population. So they have a strong connection. Obviously, Hamas has a strong connection with the local people. Second, the massive attack on the 7th of October 7th took place in a very special context, international, global context, which was that Western power under the impulse of Trump thought at that moment that, okay, the Palestinian question is not a key issue anymore. It has not been solved, of course, the problem has not been solved, but with various Arab countries normalizing their relationships with Israel, Morocco, some of the petromonarchies, etc., and the Palestinian Authority being totally weak and it's the Palestinian issue has become something which is quite residual in the Middle East. So we don't need to care so much about it. We have other serious problems in Syria, etc., etc. So it was extremely vital. It was vital at that moment for the Palestinians, and this is why Hamas did that, which was very risky, as what came after showed. No, the Palestinian problem has not been solved. we still exist, and we will never surrender. We will never give up. We will fight. We will fight. We will continue. Whence this rather, let's say, not only risky, but it's a desperate action. So, yes, and of course, it's obvious that terrorism, mass terrorism, is an issue related to states. Who can afford to kill thousands of people by air, which is really terrorism, except states. Only states can do that, and states which can use very sophisticated means of. Okay, I mean the endless argument about terrorism. It's always based in the West on the oblivion of the fact, the massive fact that massive terrorism is something which is related to the action of states, criminal states, rogue states, or respectable states, but this is the massive fact, and that's it. Okay, and as for the second question, it's the West, from Western democracy today, evolving in the direction of more and more frontal, direct confrontation with what they call systemic opponents today, not to say enemies. Democracy, in that sense, has become, in the promotion of Western hegemony, which is still a fact at a global scale, democracy has become the main weapon used for these confrontations with the bad objects, bad others, that is China, Iran, terrorism in general, and some other evil objects like Venezuela, people who are in power in Venezuela today, and some other. But what the heart of the problem is this new definition or relation to otherness in general. That is, that the way of systematically othering those who stick to their own difference, typified as undemocratic. China, before all, of course, but as well Iran, Palestinian, etc., etc. So this new form of intolerance in the relation of the West to all the others, and I think this is the key. That is, democracy has become the instrument, the tool, or the weapon for a new global crusade against all the others who do not comply with the rules we set, we, the West, set. And this is it. So, no, there's from that angle, I would say that there's a profanation of the word democracy, which makes it more and more difficult for us to use it in a progressive sense. It has become what they need to promote their interest and their propaganda in the confrontation with what resists to the globalization of their rule. And that's it. Yeah. So if you take all the very contemporary stakes on artificial intelligence, immediately as it has become, let's say, artificial intelligence has become an economic stake of first importance. It's problematized in the US as the stake in terms of confrontation with China. With China, they will try to steal our inventions, innovation, and all this. Immediately, it becomes a stake in terms of confrontation. So yes, this is.
Here's a question from a young person who's not very confident. So she said it's a stupid question. She wonders if it's because of misinterpretation of Zionism that caused the bullying of the people in Gaza.
No, it's not misinterpretation of Zionism. It's a sense of Zionism. Basically, Zionism is a separatist ideology. It divides the Jews from all the others, and the idea was always that Jews should should build their own state, which means that there should be some kind of homogeneity, which is phantasmatic because there's no homogeneity of the Jewish people in general, but meaning that it has to be made, built up, set up by excluding all those who cannot be called or call themselves or acknowledged as Jews. Which means that the Palestinians who live as, well, on paper, Israeli citizens do not have the same rights as the Jews. So this is the basic element, and at the end of the process, what you have is ethnic cleansing. What's happening today? Ethnic cleansing and occupation of the West Bank and the colonies of the West Bank, and a state which is not only an apartheid state, which is always was, but more and more openly supremacist. And supremacist in that sense, it's the essence of fascism. Supremacy. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Brossat, for your powerful talk. You mentioned that leaders in Taiwan have admiration for Israel because of this self-positioning as like the link or the window to the West. And I'm just wondering, following from that, what other features or ideologies does the Taiwan government share with the state of Israel to support this very long-standing and substantial affiliation or friendship? Like I'm thinking of like the commonalities of both being settler colonies or being grouped together under U.S. foreign policies. I'm just wondering if you have any other thoughts about that.
Yeah, two things. One thing is what the current present rulers in Taiwan admire and envy, in particular, concerning Israel, the Israeli political elites, is their total intertwining with the US administration, elites, leading figures, etc., etc. This is their ideal. They would like to be as close, having this intimate connection, which is more than a link that is sticking together with the leading elites of the US. This is one thing. And they are trying hard to do it, but they are far, far from it. I mean, the Israelis are, for historical reasons and all these things, they are very far. This is one thing. And the second thing is that if you look carefully at the way things happen, actually, the Jews in general, not taking into consideration the fact that knowing what the Jews really are the people, not letting this aside, but the Jews as perceived, seen by the non-Jews, became white in terms of, white people, black people, and that. The Jews became really white only after the creation of Israel. It's may be strange for you, but I can assure you that in a country like France, in the 30s of last century, for most of people, Jews were somewhere in between in terms of racial characterizations. They had something Asian, strangely enough. They were somehow Oriental, and there were many words for describing this in French, but not only in France. Yes, they were, depending on various categories, but yes, many of them were assimilated, but still there was a slight difference, which made that they were not totally white, as we consider ourselves as white. And this is one of the explanations of the fact that during the war, the non-Jewish population of France just dropped them and let them be transported to concentration camps, didn't care. And the crucial moment was the sudden appearance of a Jewish power having the form of a state, the state of Israel. And the fact that this state, the Jewish state, was recognized by all the Western powers and then international community was a decisive moment which made that, okay, now the Jews are white. They become white. And now they are the spoiled children of the right race, if I may say this in so vulgar terms. But it works like that in collective imagination of many people. And I think that this is a very attractive model for, to some extent, the elites in Taiwan. How to become white. How to become white. Speaking English, of course, to speak English, whence all this delirium on bilingualism. You know that in a few years, all of you will be completely bilingual, talking English as well as Mandarin or Taiwanese, no problem, all of you. And becoming white, that is, if you have a Western first name, it's a plus, it's a little plus, so you don't. I'm sorry for you, really, but you should be called, I don't know, Louis or whatsoever. Yeah, and all these ways of, you know, the temptation to become white. And the easiest way, of course, is to be very as close as possible to the Americans, because the US are, of course, the heart of the white race, as everybody knows, not the Europeans. So this, you know, that kind of temptation, becoming white, and being as close as possible to the heart, the core, the kernel of white civilization that is the US. In other terms, becoming white, Hawaii, being Hawaii. Face to China, becoming Hawaii. Becoming white, becoming American, speaking English, and all what goes with it. That is barbarism. Yeah.
Okay, we have really gone over time, so I want to thank Professor Brossat for a very, very enlightening conversation with us, and I want to thank everyone here in the audience and also participants online. Thank you so much.